Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for, I think this is our first NABJ International panel to discuss how we use digital media in different ways in different countries. This panel was conceived, I suppose, to introduce myself. I'm Joe Davidson. I'm a founder of NABJ and a columnist with the National Association. I'm a columnist with the Washington Post. This panel discussion really started maybe a year ago with a discussion over lunch between myself and Bob Wokesa, who was one of our panelists. He is on the faculty at Wits University in Johannesburg. And he'll be more fully introduced shortly by our moderator, Tori Parrish. But I wanted to take a few minutes to explain the genesis of this international operation with Wits University in Johannesburg. Bob and I, he basically came up with this idea of this level of collaboration between the National Association of Black Journalists and Wits to help integrate our two operations to some extent. So this is kind of the first step in doing more to have a level of cooperation between journalists in the United States, Black journalists in particular, and journalists as well as journalism students on the continent, beginning with South Africa. We talked about things like having different kinds of professional exchanges, different meetings, different seminars. But before we get into the meat of the panel, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Wokesa, who is zooming in from Johannesburg, to briefly explain the concept behind this collaboration. And then I'll introduce Tori Parrish, our moderator, who will introduce all of the panelists. Bob?
Thank you very much, Joe, and good morning, everybody. Good morning from, and good afternoon here in Johannesburg. Thank you very much, Joe, for this opportunity. And indeed, last year, I was on sabbatical at the University of Southern California, DC campus, working with colleague veteran journalist Adam Clayton Powell, as well as at Howard University's Center for African Studies. Let me just check in if you can hear me loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, say that again, please, though.
No, I was just checking in to see if you could hear me, and that's confirmed now. Right. So while on that sabbatical, I touched base with colleagues at Howard, as I mentioned. Specifically, it was the Africa Day of May in last year, which we hosted at Howard University in partnership with the Center for African Studies at Howard University. And I think that's when I first met Joe, although we had corresponded online before then. And we got talking. And the background to this is that I am director of the African Center for the Study of the United States, which is a center that was established here at the University of Witwatersrand, better known just as WITS, in March 2018. And the purpose for the establishment of the center was to move towards intellectual public engagement, research, teaching collaborations between ourselves and colleagues in the United States. Being a journalist myself, a former journalist, I should say, who went into academia, I thought, journalism, media, and communication would be an important component of this. So it was quite heartening to get to meet Joe and for us to have the initial brainstorming sessions, which ultimately led us to connecting with the NABJ executive, including President Ken Lemon. We had a couple of virtual meetings with a few other colleagues looking into journalism practice, the differences and similarities across the ocean, looking at young journalists, particularly those in J schools, but those also looking to jump into the digital media space, seeing as conventional media was under actually siege here on the continent. And this actually led to earlier this year having our first of events during which journalism students in J schools in the US met with their colleagues here in South Africa virtually to exchange some very, very interesting experiences and plans for the future. And ultimately, this then led to today's event, which we think is one of the many that we plan going forward. We have a whole host of projects and activities that we are launching, but I suppose those will be available via other means. And over back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Bob. Appreciate your inspiration for this collaboration, which led to this panel. I'd now like to introduce Tori Parrish. She's a former board member here at NABJ. She's a reporter for Newsday on Long Island, and she also is someone who has some international reporting experience. And she will introduce our panel and conduct it from there. Tori.
Thank you, Joe. Morning, everyone. All right, so I'm going to introduce our panelists just very briefly. Their fuller bios are on the calendar, the NABJ schedule calendar. I'm just going to read a couple sentences of their bios so we can get right into the discussion. One of our panelists is Ellen Albert. She's a little bit late. She is in Namibia. She's a little bit late. We have Travis Lyles, social media editor at the Washington Post. In his time at the Washington Post, Travis Lyles has constantly led new initiatives and been a major part of the newsroom transformation. In 2017, he began running the Post Instagram account and pioneered focusing on shareable posts that prioritize simple text-based headlines, a content style that you now see across the industry. We have Roland Martin. Roland is the host, managing editor of Roland Martin Unfiltered, a daily digital show, CEO of the Black Star Network, and he produces a twice daily commentary on iHeartRadio's Black Information Network. He's the author of 4 books. His latest is White Fear, How the Browning of America is Making White Folks Lose Their Minds. And we have Bob Okisa, who just spoke. He's the director of the African Center for the Study of the United States at the University of, I might mispronounce this, Witwatersrand, South Africa. He teaches and supervises student projects in international journalism and communication. He was a reporter for Kenya's Standard newspaper and has served as a managing editor and editorial director for various newspapers. So go ahead and get off the questions. First question: how critical is social media to either general reporting overall, or to your reporting in 2024? I'm going to start with you, Travis, because you work on social media team.
Yeah, so hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Deputy Director of Social Media at the Washington Post, so I run the social team. I mean, off-platform programming and social media is so much of how we reach audiences as journalists and as news organizations in 2024. Obviously, like, there are people who are subscribing to our channels, subscribing to our site, more traditional, older readers, but the way we engage with a lot of people is off-platform surfaces. So, there's a whole group of people who are not interacting with Washington Post content, not interacting with any of our journalists on our site. And so we obviously have realized that, and we have to realize that as news organizations, as legacy news organizations in 2024, we have to be really good going to where they are and interacting with them there. And so that's why we've invested so much in social media and off-platform programming. We have a team of 12 that I lead, and we, see it as, really the door to a huge group of readers who we would not interact with otherwise.
Do you know what percentage of your readers use your social media?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but we have obviously, a certain amount of subscribers. I think it's around 2.5 million for the Washington Post right now. But our footprint when it comes to off platform and how many people we really reach when it comes to Instagram or other platforms on social media is much larger. So we see it as a really important and crucial above the funnel play. So, you know, we're interacting with people for the first time. They might have never read a Washington Post article, seen a piece of Washington Post content, but we're putting our journalism in front of them in a space where they're interacting every single day. And so the long-term business play is that they, you know, see our content, enjoy it, and long-term, hopefully subscribe.
Roland, can you chime in? I know you're very active on social media. Chime in, how crucial is that to your reporting?
In order to, so I'm approaching it from a different perspective. One of the biggest mistakes for many journalists is we don't pay any attention to the business of the business. So in order to understand how do you make money, how do you survive, how do you actually continue to have jobs and build a company, you must understand the business aspect. So if you're spending significant amounts of time trying to get people to come to where you are, then you're going to fail. So you have to understand if they're already in other places. The question is, how are you in those places driving your content in order for you to be able to get them to consume your content? So, and you also then have to understand how each platform reaches people and how they speak to them in a totally different way. So when you're communicating on X, and then, well, I still call it Twitter, the hell Elon Musk. When you're communicating on Twitter, you're communicating on Facebook and Fanbase and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and LinkedIn and YouTube. All of those are operating in a totally different way in terms of how they're reaching people. And you also have to then factor in the amount of time and energy that you're putting into something. So I know a lot of folks who invest a lot of time into a reel on Instagram, which is the dumbest thing in the world to me, because from a monetization standpoint, it's not there. Same thing with YouTube. At the NBA All-Star game, I was talking with the CEO of YouTube, and he was like, hey, Shorts is really, really great. Really, really great in terms of driving subscribers to your YouTube channel. All right, that's wonderful. But the problem is a short is only having a CPM of 25 cents. So if I'm going to do a CPM anywhere from $9 to $12 on video on YouTube, why in the hell am I going to invest a lot of time in a short? So we'll look at our numbers and say, oh, right, we did 2.5 million views in the shorts, but it made $600. So I'm not spending that level of time. Now, why am I speaking about the financial aspect? Because that's how you stay in business. You look at even major companies, mid-sized companies, and even smaller companies, they are spending lots of time driving information to social, and it's not making them money. They're not even breaking even. And so you have to factor in all of those things. And so you apply the exact same thing from a business standpoint to a personal standpoint. How do you use the platforms to drive people to listen or to watch long form? Now I'll make this final point. I had someone tell me, they said, hey, you know, young folks just want stuff short. Yet if you look at terms of how YouTube operates, you're able to generate more revenue when they're watching the long form content. So we did 2021, about 150 million views on YouTube that year. And average watch time was 9.5 minutes and did around 860,000 just on YouTube. 2022 did 120 million views. Average watch time was 16 minutes, did 1.1 million. So people were watching the long form content, but we were also giving it to them in different ways. They could watch the whole show, they can watch the segment, they can watch a portion of it. So I don't use one way of communicating with them. I'm hitting the social media audience in different ways on the different platforms, but also driving them back to what is the greatest revenue generator, because that's what pays for it all.
Bob, can you talk about the flexibility that social media allows and allowing journalists to be everywhere and allowing boots on the ground and allowing a quick communication?
Thanks. I think I'll start by saying that social media on the African continent specifically has been nothing short of disruptive of the conventional practices that we saw across the continent in many ways. And I think journalists have had to shift practices to factor in social media in a big way. The flexibility comes in many forms. In one form, I can give the example of the many journalism forums. I will just also point out at this point that WhatsApp is basically the most important numerically in a social media platform on the continent. So the flexibility this provides is that journalists are able on these WhatsApp groups to share perspectives on the big stories that are happening in one moment, the potential angles that can be taken. It provides an opportunity to monitor developments almost minute by minute as big stories, including political events or emergencies, as they happen. And I think we began to see here in South Africa, in Kenya, in Ghana, a situation where newspapers that have gone online essentially kind of pick their stories from what is developing on social media, so that shortly after you see an item that is getting many clicks or hits, you actually then see it in the next TV bulletin, or you see it in the next day's newspaper, and so forth. So indeed, social media offers many forms of flexibility. In fact, even in terms of distribution, and again, WhatsApp is quite major on the continent. We've seen, some media establishments actually distributing their newspapers in PDF formats on WhatsApp, which actually removes these, the kind of practices in the past where you had to transport physical copies to different locations in the country.
Thanks, Bob. Travis, can you talk about the flexibility, following on what Bob said, the flexibility that it offers, social media has offered your journalists, and what you may be doing differently, even just from a year or two ago?
Yeah, so I will say, I feel like personalities right now are everything when it comes to how people interact with journalism and journalists. I mean, Roland's a testament to that. People follow people. And so people, obviously some people subscribe to news organizations, but people gravitate and follow people. And so we've really tried to elevate our journalists and make them into personalities. Obviously, we're not a television network or a TV station. And so we have a disadvantage there. And so we've really thought and put a lot of effort into how we elevate our journalists as personalities, make them attractive people to follow on the internet, on social media. And we've seen the benefits of that over the past few years. Obviously, reporting is always evolving and changing, but it's not just, it's for a long time not been just reporting. Like, you have to obviously, report, file your story, then you have to, promote your story and market your story and talk to your fans and followers. And so we've really put a lot of effort into the second half of that, and really how do you extend the reach of your story? How do you interact with your readers who want to talk to you, want to engage with you? We do a lot of live chats. We do a lot of we have a lot of opportunities for our reporters to interact with our readers, with our viewers. And I think that's really important, because we want people to know them, not just as a reporter from the Washington Post, but a reporter who is a person just like them, who goes to the grocery store, who goes to the movies, who is a normal person, who they can trust. And I think that's really been a huge thing for us over the past couple of years.
So I'm gonna disagree with Travis a little bit on that.
Okay.
We are no longer siloed. There's no such thing as newspapers, television, radio. That has been obliterated. So you have to think you are media companies. even if you're an individual in your independent media. Because what again, I go back to, if you're studying, people are consuming information. So we are information deliverers. If you talk about newspaper, television, radio, those are simply delivery systems. We're in the media business. So you might be the Washington Post, but you're driving video. And you have to think in that way as well. And for me, I went to communications high school. So I've always thought multimedia, did multimedia in college. So every place that I've worked, even when I was the managing editor of 3 Black newspapers, I was always thinking multimedia. I launched the first Black news podcast here at the Chicago Defender. So we were doing interviews. I said, no, you're going to be recording all your interviews because we're driving those audio. The next year we launched the first Black news video podcast. And so you have to rethink how you are getting information to now understanding that there are individuals who will be getting an audio. There are individuals who will be getting on video. There are still people who want to read the information. And then even when you talk about video, how you utilize captioning, because, and I know this may sound crazy, there are people in places who are actually watching the video but not listening to the video because they're at work and they can't let any of their coworkers hear what they're watching. So they're looking at your video, but they're actually reading the caption and the information. So you have to understand how people are consuming the information. And now your job is how am I now getting it to them? How am I getting the information to them? And so I think a lot about that in terms of how we're trying to service the consumer. And again, I'm always mindful of the business aspect, because at the end of the day, and this was one of the greatest mistakes when the internet first became ubiquitous and media companies started doing it, we were just doing stuff and just putting stuff out there, not actually thinking about the economic reality of that. And then folks try to rein it back in. Okay, now how do we do it? And we're still grappling with that. And so that's one of the struggles. And so if you approach this, that you are a media entity, whether you work for a major company, a mid-size, a small, or you're independent, and now your job is, how do I drive information using all of these platforms to various people and to reach them? And then I'm studying even those numbers in terms of who's on what platform, because my audience on YouTube is 65% male, but it's 65% female on Instagram. And so now I have to understand the different audiences and how I am pushing out information.
Thank you. Bob, can you talk about,
I don't think you just.
Bob, can you talk about how video storytelling helps spread information in areas with wide literacy gaps? And to be clear, there are wide literacy gaps in Southern Africa. There are wide literacy gaps in the US. So can you talk about how video storytelling helps bridge that gap?
Certainly, I think the starting point here is that we have a language problem on the continent. And it comes in the form of the fact that, first of all, the continent comprises of journalists who work for Francophone or French-speaking media houses. There are those that are Anglophone or English-speaking, and lots of folks in the hinterlands of just every African country speak vernacular languages. They might not be English or French or Portuguese or any one of the more popular African languages like Kiswahili or Zulu or Fulani or any other number of large languages. And for that reason, we've seen, particularly with the rise of TikTok, which essentially has taken the continent by storm, where actually journalists, a good number of innovative journalists who work in the French language, for example, do captioning for videos based on stories that might emanate from print in digital format, that is, and do captions in English and vice versa. Journalists who work in the English language in a country like Kenya, who want their content to be seen, to be heard in Senegal, or South African journalists who are working, for example, on a presidential visit from a leader of a country such as Mozambique, which is Portuguese speaking, will do captioning and use TikTok as a means of snapshots, short videos that then are linked to their media houses. I've seen this done by a media house here called News 24. I've seen that done by a Kenyan media group called Daily Nation. And therefore, this helps actually beyond that also to, speak to people who are not necessarily conversant in high levels of English. They are not, their vocabulary is kind of limited. And therefore they can have language that is simple, clear, to the point, accompanied by visuals that help them comprehend what is at issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to add this here because, and so 2018, who came to our convention in 2018 in Detroit and when Tyler Perry spoke? Who was here? All right. If you were not there, you need to go on YouTube and watch that session. So I invited Tyler to come speak. And the reason I wanted him to speak, because I wanted him to walk our audience through how critically important it is for you to not just know your audience, but also how do you develop your audience? How do you cultivate your audience, and how do you talk to your audience? So one of the things, too often we are trained in those, if you worked in mainstream media, and I used to be at the Austin American Statesman, the Fort Worth Star Telegram, 6 years at CNN, is that we're trying to reach everybody. But we're now living in a fractured micro world. So if I'll use radio as an example, and I'm scared to even ask who actually listens to terrestrial radio in this room, because of probably fewer hands than who was at the Tyler Perry thing in Detroit. But if you understand radio, you turn the radio on, you're going to have news talk, you're going to have country, old country, new country, new school jazz, smooth jazz, R&B, old school R&B. You're going to have pop. I mean, you're going to have all of these different musical genres. That's literally the world that we're now living in. It's no longer the 4 major newspapers, the 3 major networks. So to understand content, you could have an extremely loyal audience of 50,000 people. And you can actually do more business than somebody that has 1 million. So one of the greatest mistakes, and the reason I use Tyler, because we talk all the time, he and I talk all the time about this, he understands his audience. And he doesn't give a damn about anybody outside of his audience. His whole deal is, if I'm serving my audience what they want, they're going to watch. So people are always mesmerized. They're like, oh my God, I hate this movie. I'm telling y'all right now, he doesn't care if you don't like his movie. Because if you don't like his movie, you're not his audience. And so when you are building a social media audience, you have to have a relationship with them that is 2-way. It cannot be 1-way. Beyonce is one of the few people who can post something without a damn caption and 3 million are gonna look at it. You're not Beyonce. And so when you cultivate your audience and you super serve your audience, Tom Joyner always talks about this here. If you take care of your audience will always take care of you. And so I think one of the greatest mistakes that mainstream media organizations are still doing, they don't know who their core audience is. And they're trying to chase as many people as possible. And then what ends up happening is you start getting further away from what your core audience wants and desires. And then when they leave, now you're in trouble. And so even as individuals, you need to be thinking about what you post, what you have to say, how you're feeding them. And I'm telling you, when you respect your audience, when you cultivate your audience, and you're building and what you're sharing with them, they'll be with you and then they will follow you. So if you go from the Post to this place to that place, to Independent, they're like, all right, well, wherever you going, I'm going. So when you talk about those individual voices, that's why that matters. So that's why when a lot of the newsletters and things, those products that were driven by personalities in mainstream, when a lot of those mainstream outlets just sort of ignored those folks, and then when they bounced, they took all of those people with them, which meant revenue walked out of the door as well. And so never forget, if you cultivate and serve your audience, you have a powerful weapon that you can wield that also you can monetize.
I want to follow up on that with Travis.
Yeah.
We'll talk about how the Washington Post targets an audience. What may work on TikTok may not work on Instagram and other platforms.
Yeah, no, I'll just add onto what Roland said. I'm the guy in the mainstream media newsroom who is like, who wrote, like, why do we write this story? Who was the audience we're trying to reach with this? And I swear, like, not only us, but some of our competitors, we write stories every single day where I'm like, we wrote this story for us. Like, we did not need to write this story.
There you go.
And it happens every single week. And I'm like, guys, like, we have to change something here. We're also like, we don't have unlimited resources. Like, we have to reallocate the time that we spent to write this. It's gonna get 500 readers and figure out how we can move these resources somewhere else where it can go further for us. And these are discussions, as a leader in the newsroom, as a senior editor in our newsroom, we have every single week. And we're getting better. Don't get me wrong. It's a work in progress, but it is a struggle. And it's something where, I will say I'm so thankful to have leaders in our newsroom who lean on the audience team, lean on the experts, lean on the data folks in our newsroom and say, like, this didn't do well. Why did it not do well? Who was the audience we were trying to reach? Should we do a live blog next time instead of a full story? Should we approach this differently? Should we do a vertical video for social and get our reporter on camera? And so we're constantly thinking about how we can adjust things to make our resources go further, to extend our footprint, not just on O&O, but on social media as well. So we're constantly looking at how we can adjust things and do things differently, and also just not do things that don't work.
I want to bring in Africa. The reason I want to bring that in because Americans don't give a damn about anybody else outside the United States. Let's just go ahead and say that. You just look at
Not true.
it is true.
Not
The
true.
data is very clear. We do not really. You look at the data. The data is real clear. How much international stuff are a lot of people actually consuming?
Not much.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that can go to Post, Times, television, radio. We have to understand that. But this is the mistake that we're making. So if you're in a city, how many of you, so first of all, how many folks in here are working in a mainstream media outlet? Raise your hand. Okay, so what's the fastest growing continent in terms of population right now? Africa. How many of you in your respective city have looked at the data of the largest African populations in your cities? That's my point. You're not even looking at your own cities. So you don't know, you might be living in a place where the largest population are Nigerians. In Washington, D.C., in the DMV, huge Ethiopian population. Houston, where I'm born and raised, has the largest population of Nigerians in the United States outside of Nigeria. 2 years ago, I was in Liberia. This is one of the outfits that they made for me there. And it was the 200th anniversary of the freed enslaved folks in the United States creating Liberia. So they wanted to do this big event in the United States. And I was like, why y'all trying to do a big event in the United States? They were like, bro, we want to get Liberian Americans involved. I was like, no, why don't you do the event in every one of the top 10 cities, the largest Liberian American population. I said, because now you're not trying to have people travel. They were like, that's a good idea. So we're not even understanding who's in the city. So if you're in a city and you have a major Ethiopian population and the Ethiopian prime minister or the president is coming, then you can be catering to that particular audience, and that audience is going to gravitate to your content. So let's say again, you're independent and mainstream is ignoring, you got the whole story to yourself, and they're going to turn to you. I had a sister who was with the African Union, gave a speech, and y'all, I just attended the event. I was like, all right, we're going to go ahead and shoot the event. She gave a speech. I can't pronounce her name because I still can't pronounce her name. And I had her on the show several times. And yo, her speech blew up all across the continent. Like just nuts. And they were like, Roland, thank you for live streaming this on your Black Star Network. This was a speech, and this is why I try to shoot everything where we go. This is a speech that she gave talking about how African nations need to free themselves from colonial rule even today. It was so huge. Again, I'm not thinking about it, but when you're in a social media world, you're not just the United States. The world is watching. So I just need you to think differently where you are to understand who your audience is, who the population is, because I'll be frank, your white bosses may not even give a damn. And that's where you say, okay, well, fine. On my off time, I'm still gonna cover this. You might put that on your own social, and your social then blows up, and they had no clue whatsoever. So I just need you to just think a little bit differently as an individual, wherever you are.
Okay. Bob, many social media storytellers are not formally trained journalists. How does them having access to social media as a storytelling tool influence your storytelling or other storytelling among journalists?
No, you're absolutely right. We've seen the explosion of very many so-called public intellectuals on the African continent that, most of them talking about Pan-African issues, often working on stories that kind of rail against so-called hegemony from the United States and the West more broadly. And I can mention to you, as quite a lot. There's the former African Union ambassador to Washington, D.C., Arikana Chihombori. She's a Ghanaian Zambian, born in Ghana, but born in Zimbabwe, married in Ghana. I think some of you who followed the African Union in Washington, D.C. office might recall her. There's the Kenyan intellectual called PLO Lumumba, who kind of, in fact, tries to ape Martin Luther King in his kind of speaking and speeches recorded on video and so forth. This is a huge challenge to journalists because it's kind of advocacy, kind of quasi journalism or public intellectual journalism, and so journalists are challenged really to how to get onto the big stories because they discuss everything from GMOs to African integration to issues of race to African Americans and Africans for that matter and so forth. What I think we've started seeing is a good number of media houses on the continent getting into that space, so that it's not just necessarily reporting breaking news or newsy events, but really going out to big thematic issues. Like a good example is, just recently, I think last week, the South African trade minister was in Washington, D.C. to attend the African Growth and Opportunity Act annual forum. And of course, there was a lot of public intellectual work on by videos posted on YouTube, as well as TikTok. And I could see that right here in Johannesburg, the Sunday Times, which also runs both print, digital, and video, riding on the work of these public intellectuals to tell the story of South Africa-US relations in the AGOA Forum. So, and I think I'll also add a curious incident here. of essentially many. Okay, so I'll start by saying, for example, that many African countries had huge challenges with conventional media. Setting up TV stations was quite expensive. Running radio stations, staff and so forth was quite difficult. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen the emergence of digital first, social media driven kinds of platforms that target online audiences. I'll give the example of an establishment that came out of a newspaper here called Mail and Guardian, which is a highly respected newspaper. Out of that came what is called The Continent. And The Continent actually deals with big geopolitical issues relating to Africa and the rest of the world, but it's distributed fully by WhatsApp in PDF format. So that would be an example. And I think there are many other examples. I think in the case of a country like Burundi, for example, there are journalists who are actually using WhatsApp voice notes because they are not allowed to operate within the country. So there are refugees in places like, Burundian refugees in places like Uganda, Tanzania, and so forth that actually report from the outside using social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So this is for Travis. The same question for Travis and Roland. Roland, how are social media storytellers, they're not formally trained journalists, how are they influencing your storytelling? If they are.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that our competitors are not just the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and these major media outlets. They are everyone. Anyone who has a phone. Roland is a Washington Post competitor. Like,
You damn Skippy.
right. It's real. Like, people. There's a very rare instances where people consume things multiple times. So, like, for example, our audience on Instagram, for example, is 60% of the people who follow us also follow the New York Times. And so if the New York Times posts something, as well as CNN as well has a large portion of our audience overlaps. If CNN or the New York Times posts something before us, we really look at it as like, okay, like, should we post something different? Should we take a different angle on this? Because a huge portion of our audience has already seen that from one of our competitors. But when it comes to, folks who are not traditional journalists posting things, like if we can't get that content, whatever they're posting, people are going to consume that. And so we really have to look at it as, okay, they are a competitor for us. And so if we don't have that content, we really look at it as, okay, like we have to either find a different angle for this story if we can't get, we can't get their content on our platforms. And we really see it as, we take them seriously. So.
I think there is a tremendous level of arrogance in mainstream media or in media, period. And I understand the point about who isn't a trained journalist. But again, the world that we're living in no longer exists. The world that many of us were trained in no longer exists. If you are, I dare say, if you're a journalist and you were trained, I say before 2016, most of those rules have gone out the window. Because, so let's just take from a broadcast standpoint. It used to be there was no way in hell cell phone video would ever make it on a broadcast. There was no way in hell you could do an interview on any network from your phone. COVID hit. All of a sudden, cell phones, Skype, Zoom, StreamYard, FaceTime, didn't matter, as long as you can get your ass on the air. What happened, and I hate to say after COVID, but what happened? Folks then realized, and again, I did it for 6 years, so I did free TV for 4 years and then the CNN for 6 years. Then they realized the amount of money a network was spending to send a car for you, pick you up, drive you to a studio, drive you back home. And then if you forget it was one of their studios, if they use the production house, they were dropping $1,000 to $1,500 for every hit.
Any amount of time that you spend going to the studio.
Yeah, I'm talking about to book that production house. I've gone to hundreds around the country. So all of a sudden that changed. So what we have to understand now is storytellers, it's all media. We get caught up too often in, well, so-and-so is not a journalist. No. What's the content that they are providing? The sister who shot the George Floyd video was not a journalist. That is one of the most viewed videos in the history of television. So we have to, we need to dial back our arrogance in terms of, well, you're not a journalist. There are people who are doing podcasts now, who are getting information that journalists are not getting, that information is driving your broadcast or newspapers or your digital clicks. And so we should be careful with that, but we still have to abide by the basic tenets of journalism in terms of how we get information. So we just have to realize that we can't be so hardcore with that person, not a journalist. No, what is the content? What's the information that they're getting? And then how can we then supplement that with our reporting to our audience? And so we just can't be so arrogant to say, well, so-and-so is not a journalist, because I can guarantee you, your competitor is going to access the information and use it and convey it to their audience and build an audience off of that. And then you're going to look up and say, what happened? Well, your arrogance kept you from doing that. So there are people who are local people in your communities who are just out there gathering information. Maybe what you should do is work with them, teach them some of the things that we do to assist them, and not just treat them as if they are a pariah.
Yeah, and I'll just add that, you know, the random person on TikTok or Instagram is not like, oh, let me see what outlet this person works for. Like, they're just like, oh, this person has good information.
There you go.
I don't know if they're journalists or not, but they have good information. And so as news organizations, as journalists, we really have to think about like what sets us apart. And so at the Post, that's access. We have people in all these foreign countries. We have people who can, fly to any place we need to go. Roland just talked about Tyler Perry. That's his, example of his access. So as journalists, as news organizations, we have to push our access to the forefront. And that's really what sets us apart, in my opinion.
Yeah, but and then when you talk about not just the access, when you're talking about if the people with the information, this is also where misinformation comes in.
Right.
I was on a panel yesterday, but I couldn't. I flew to Houston for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's funeral, so I had to go home for that. So that's why I missed that panel. But the flip side for us as journalists, when folks are posting the information and it's lies, that is when our integrity and credibility comes in, where we then say, this is a lie. This is truth. This is truth. This is truth. This is a lie. And so what then happens is, then folks go, okay, you're saying this is true, but when I am providing the backup and the data to that, now all of a sudden, that folks then they'll go to that person, hey, what you posted is a lie. Well, Lamar corrected you. Now, if y'all want to get into it with me on what's true or not, bring your ass. Let's go. But again, that's where our role then begins to change. And so a lot of us go, well, I'm not responding to that. I hear that all the time. I'm not responding to that nonsense. Yeah, but that nonsense has gotten hundreds of thousands of views, and there are people who are parroting that information. And so for me, I'm operating completely in truth. I'm not going to allow that to stand. I have people that say, like, man, why are you engaging with people who have fewer followers than you? Because a single video can blow up and can garner millions of views. And if it is lies, as a purveyor of truth, I simply cannot let that stand.
Followers don't mean anything at this point.
No.
Like, you could have one follower and you could get a video that has 10 million views. So, you know, if someone's pushing falsehoods, you know, it doesn't matter how many followers they have. You know, if you have the authority to speak on something and correct that, then you should.
Thanks, guys. Somebody said something?
I was about playing their phone.
All right, we talked about, or our panelists talked about how social media is done wrong. I want to talk about how do you do it right? What are some things that people should be doing to do it the right way? Bob, is that a question you can tackle?
No, sure. And in fact, I can write on what my colleagues have just said to add on to the fact that we see on the continent the rise of fact-checking journalism. You know, it has become almost a genre on in its own right. You know, starting from a very low base. In fact, I've personally done some research on this. And what has emerged is that as we see cases of misinformation and actually disinformation, we see the emergence of you know, fact-checking desks within some of the major African media houses. We've seen some, you know, non-governmental or what are called NPOs, you know, non-profit organizations, actually pursue that agenda. Most of them, interestingly, funded by organizations such as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or Open Society Foundation, which, you know, actually links into the other element of social media, you know, the role of, you know, nonprofits in that whole space. But it's been fascinating to see that even at some of the major journalism schools on the continent, now we are moving towards not only training journalists to be entrepreneurial, to go out there and you know, start even one man, one woman kind of operations, but also the investment in verification of facts, so as to undo the scourge of you know, of malinformation. I think the other thing that has been done, you know, pretty on, you know, is an indication of progress to correct some of the ills of in the social media space, has been that some of the mainstream media houses on the continent actually report on what's going on in social media, particularly when stories go viral. And I think we saw this quite in recent times when we had these protests in Nairobi, so-called Gen Z, you know, riots against the president there. So that when videos of, say, abductions or protests or you know, the criticism of the leadership there was going on, this was actually reported right from mainstream media, from mainstream journalists, based on what is going on in the social media spaces. I think in another example, we've seen the use of X Spaces, for example, to report to an issue that Roland mentioned earlier, which is really the diaspora, you know, African diaspora in the US particularly. I think the largest African diaspora is in the US, and we are thinking of the new diaspora, you know, recent migrants from the continent. I'm thinking here, for example, of SABC, South African Broadcasting Corporation, which has a program on X Spaces that just focuses on Africans excelling on the continent. So I think there are some indications of how the potentialities of social media can be mined for good. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. All right, Travis, Roland, can you give tips? How can we do it right? And also, are there any journalists who stand out in your mind who are really using social media the right way, making the most impact?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is just being active. And that sounds simple, but there's a lot of people who are not active on social media. I think the other thing is pick your targets. You know, there's new social platforms popping up every year. You know, we launched 4 different accounts last year, and on places like Threads and Blue Sky. But as a journalist, as single people, as you know, a single person, like, you shouldn't feel like you have to do everything. Like, figure out where your audience is, you know, who that audience is, and spend time on those platforms. If that's Threads, then spend time on Threads. If that's Instagram, spend time on Instagram. But don't feel like you have to be, you know, across the board on every single platform every single day, because if you're spreading yourself too thin, the odds are that you're not actually, you know, producing content and interacting with your followers in a way that's meaningful.
I'll say the first thing is, before you even get to the content, you need to ask yourself the most basic fundamental question. Who am I speaking to? Who am I speaking to? I have people come to me all the time and they want to say, I want to do what you do. Then my response is, but do you want to do what I do? Then look at me like I'm crazy. Because they're not thinking about who are you trying to super serve. You cannot, so we'll go back to something I used to always say when I ran the Houston Defender, the Dallas Weekly, and Chicago Defender. Even when I was at TV1, we were on a television critics panel, and when we were launching News One Now, our daily morning news show at TV1. And so I remember, I think it was Eric Deggans, one of our members, he asked, or there was another person said, how are you going to compete with Good Morning America, Today Show, and CBS? I said, we're not. I said, they can't out-black me. And our CEO, Alfred Liggins, looked at me and he was like, the hell does that mean? And I looked at Alfred and I said, they can't out-black me. I'm not wasting time covering the hostage release. I'm not. I didn't say it's not an important story. They gonna cover that. But will they be at the Sonia Massey rally that took place on the west side of Chicago on Tuesday? We live streamed that. So so you have to lock and load. Who am I trying to speak to? Am I trying to speak general? Am I trying to speak to African Americans? Am I speaking to women? Am I speaking to Black women? Am I speaking to women 1835? Am I speaking to women 40 plus? I got to understand first, who am I talking to? And now how I cover and what I covered then drives who I'm talking to. So what Travis mentioned, you have time is finite. Ain't nobody here got 24 hours, 25 hours. And somebody else got 22. We all got 24. So you take time and resources, you now then have to say, first, who am I trying to reach? And I'm gonna serve that audience. As a brother on YouTube who is he's all about all the new tech gadgets. I forgot the brother's name. My man got like 7, 8 million. He ain't trying to do anything else. He's serving his audience. So when you do that, that now then drives the type of content you do. And even within that, there's a lot of stuff, for me, I'm serving African Americans and I got other people who watch. That's great. I'm still not talking to them. I mean, I had a guy, a 70-year-old white gay dude sent me a check saying, man, I watch your show every day. I appreciate it, but I'm still not talking to him. No, I'm not, because his deal is, I'm learning stuff that I never even know existed. And so he's grabbing from what we're covering that he still can get because it's still relevant information. But for me, I'm specifically talking to an African-American audience. And so the mistake is, if you go out there and you're trying to do everything, you cannot compete with a major outlet that has 3, 4, 5, as you said, they can put somebody on a plane in 3 hours. You can't do that. So you now got to say, okay, but how can I do this here? And I can achieve maximum response from various people. And that's why, so there are many things that we do that mainstream will never even touch. And then I'm gonna tell you what then happens. What then happens is your audience then goes, no, we ain't doing Good Morning America first. We doing Roland first. I've had parents of folks who have been killed, with children killed by cops. And they've said to Ben Crump, to Lee Merritt, No, we gonna do today's show. We doing him because he covers our stuff every day. So when that happens, that's when you know you serve your audience. Nobody thought that they would be on the end of their child being shot and killed. But when they tell an attorney, no, we doing him, and they'll come on the air and say, thank you for always covering these stories, because not every one of these stories rises to the national level in terms of mainstream media. When you focus on your audience, and again, you super serve them, then you're gonna have great results. But if you don't know who you're talking to, you cannot be successful.
Thank you, Roland. Okay, I'm going to open up the discussion to the audience. If you could just raise your hand, I'll call on people. You had your hand up first, sir.
Hey, my name is Brad. I make content.
Stand up, folks over here can't hear you.
So, y'all, my name is Brad. I'm from New York City. I make content on YouTube. I have a podcast. My question is real.
Stop right there. I make content. What content do you make?
Make content that tries to uplift people.
What content do you make?
What platform?
No, what content do you make? Follow me. I make content that uplifts people. Is it spiritual? Is it cultural? Is it sports? Okay, so you make health and wellness content. There you go. Okay.
My question is, when you identify your audience and you want to speak to them specifically, you try to shape your voice, you try to shape your approach to fit them, or
Nope.
you try to come authentic?
It's all authentic. You cannot win in this game if you're not authentic. The audience today sees through fake
See
people.
everything.
They will call you out. They'll be like, man, you bullshit. You ain't real. They will call you out. It's all authenticity. That's what you have to do. And when the audience sees that, they say, yo, they accept it, they like it. And again, there are people, I had some sister on Twitter the other day, and again, I'm petty. I'm King Petty. She posted a tweet, she says, Roland Martin absolutely irks me. And I responded, I don't give a damn. I don't. You have to accept the reality that they're going to be haters. They're going to, man, I don't like your stuff. But they keep watching. They keep commenting. So when you do you, and your audience is like, yo, we got you, that's all that matters. So I don't sit here and go, okay, well, I'm gonna say this because they're gonna respond this way. They're gonna see right through it. I had some NABJ folks on Monday. They say, Roland, please don't blast NABJ about this Trump thing. And I said, they got 24 hours to fix what I felt were problems. I said, oh, I'm gonna blast that ass. Now, these are the three things that I said. Harris Faulkner of Fox News had no business being on that panel. No one from Fox News should have been on that panel after they paid $787 million settlement advancing Trump's lies in the 2020 election. That was number one. Number two, how do you have a panel of three sisters and not one brother? If there were three brothers and not one sister, sister would have been hot as hell, and I would have been with them. But number three, how in the hell you had nobody from Black-owned media on that panel in Chicago with this rich, deep history of Black-owned media? Now, as somebody who I dare say is probably the loudest advocate for Black-owned media, this organization, it would be inauthentic for me not to say something, oh, well, because I don't, no, it doesn't matter my 35 years at NABJ. That is more important to me than my 35 years at NABJ. And my audience has been like, oh, how in the hell you ain't gonna call them out, but you call the other folks out? No, I have a simple standard. If you do good, I'll talk about you. If you do bad, I'll talk about you. At the end of the day, I'm gonna talk about you. You gotta stay authentic.
Yeah.
Could we have people come up to the mic so everyone can hear to the mic at the end, to the mic and state your question?
Hello, I'm Zubaida. I'm Zubaida. I work in media relations, and I have a question for Travis. How do you determine which topics or stories are suitable for a traditional article versus TikTok or YouTube or et cetera?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out who our audience is on social and off platform in general. We know that they're a much younger, more diverse audience than our on-site audience. And so obviously we publish hundreds of pieces a day on site. And so we have to, sift through those pieces and figure out what makes sense for the off-platform audience. A lot of it is honestly just also being social media consumers. We're looking at what people are talking about. We're looking at what people like Roland are talking about and conversing about. Obviously, like with all the NABJ news this week, I've been at the Washington Post for 7 years, and I don't know that we've really posted about NABJ on our main Instagram account until this week. But like, obviously, it was such a big topic. We knew that our off-platform audience would care about what's happening here, and so part of it is being social media consumers. Part of it is knowing, deeply who our audience is, and also like our job is to extend our reach. We have a certain amount of subscribers and a certain amount of people who interact with our content online, but our goal is to extend the reach of the Washington Post and reach new audiences. So, Roland's focused on this audience that he knows exactly who it is, and we obviously know who our audience is as well, but we're also focused on like how can we reach new audiences. Our audience, to be honest, is dying. Our subscribers are getting old. We have a lot of old white subscribers who honestly have been subscribers for a long time, are very loyal to the brand. But if the Washington Post wants to last long term, we have to figure out how to gain new subscribers, gain subscribers who are younger and more diverse and who are willing to spend money long term. And so that's really what my team focuses on. Obviously, a lot of folks on social media are not willing to buy a subscription or not even willing to, pay for journalism at all. And we know that. But it's worth it for us to interact with them. And then the goal is long term, hopefully, once they get some money, once they get out of college, once they get a job, they'll remember the Washington Post. They'll remember they've leaned on our coverage on social media for a long period of time. And hopefully long term, they subscribe and invest in our journalism.
So I also want you to think about, again, I go back to when you're super serving your audience. When I say they'll take care of you, when you have that relationship and they say we are invested in this, it's not just them watching and reading. We'll be 6 years old. My show will be 6 years old on September 4th. We started with 157,000 YouTube subscribers. We're now 1.34 million. But here's what people don't understand, the analytics. 6% of those who watch don't subscribe. So you also need to understand how algorithms work. And so the mistake I don't do anything because the algorithm says so. When Shannon Sharpe did his interview, and I know Shannon very well, when Shannon Sharpe did his Cat Williams interview, folks are like, yo, man, I can't wait for the show so you can weigh in. I was like, that shit didn't happen. Because for me, there was nothing of value news-wise for me in that interview. Now, I could have commented and hit 500,000 million views. But I refused to do that because there was nothing of interest for me. So you have to then make a decision. Am I going to be a slave to the algorithm? Or I'm going to make decisions that, for me, are different. After the Will Smith, Chris Rock slap, that was rough for me. I mean, I couldn't go to sleep for several hours because I know we all know Chris. And that night, I literally called both of them and text both of them. So my approach the next day to that situation was totally different than most people. That exceeded 2 million views. So I'm mindful of how I approach certain topics with our audience, because you can take a very sensational approach that's not deep, that's not thought-provoking, that's not really helpful, or you can take the approach of a lot of the entertainment folks or whatever. So I don't, like, this was before even my own stuff. I do not allow any housewives on my show. And in fact, I was on for TV One, and there was a housewife that was booked, and I literally told the crew, you cannot mention the show. She's here discussing a topic, y'all can talk topic. Now, I had some people who were like, they took offense to that. I said, well, you ain't the managing editor. I am. So I make those kind of decisions because, and that's me being very subjective. But when I say how your audience responds, in these almost 6 years, my audience, mind you, I don't do subscriptions because not every Black person can afford that. My audience has contributed $2.5 million to the show. Black people walk up to me on the street and put money in my hand. Checks. Woman in Atlanta airport, she said she had a dollar bill that was made out like a flower. I mean, like a bird. She said, this is all I have, but I'm giving you this dollar. I took a picture and I posted. So why am I saying that? That only happens because you are serving the audience. And so if you feed bullshit and your audience wants real substantive stuff, they're like, man, I can't watch you. I can't, because you just like the rest of them. So that's where you have to make a decision. And I say public, if y'all want to know who's so-and-so dating, go somewhere else. I don't cover who's dating, who had a baby, who got divorced. I literally would say, y'all can go elsewhere, and I'm good with that. I will give up the views to stay here because I'm serving the audience. So that's also how you have to approach your content, and you don't fall for all the other stuff. Like, well, I mean, they got the new dances. I love the dance, but I ain't doing no damn TikTok challenge. But so again, that's where you have to make a conscious decision.
Yeah, and I'll just say, like, we've all seen people on social media who are like, man, they're just doing the most, right? Like this is not them. Like people crave authenticity on social media. And as soon as someone is like fake or phony, like it just like, at least for me, like gives me the ick. And we can feel that through the screen. And so people gravitate to people like Roland. Hate him or love him, people gravitate to people like Stephen A. Smith, because they know, like, what's Stephen A. gonna say about the Cowboys, right? Like, people know exactly what
I hate the Cowboys more than I hate the Cowboys more than I hate the Klan.
But that
I'm from Houston, baby.
right. But that authenticity, people follow people for authenticity. And as soon as they sniff any fake or phoniness, they'll unfollow immediately.
My name is Bob Butler, I'm a reporter at KCBS Radio, retired last year. And Stephen A. would just laugh about the Cowboys. I subscribe to the Post and Roland. This is for Bob. How many people in here have actually been to the continent? I see 1, 2, 3, like 5 or 6 hands. Many people in the United States think about Africa. They think they have to get off the plane and run from the lions. Bob, do you have the same problems when it comes to social media and lies and misinformation as we do here in the United States?
No, clearly we do. The problem of misinformation is rife on the continent in a major way. I'll give you an example, that might be of relevance even to an audience in the US. In South Africa, we had elections in May, on May 29. In that election, the former president is called Jacob Zuma, for some of you who might be familiar with that name. He left the Liberation Party called the African National Congress to form another party called Umkhonto Wesizwe, which is just known by its abbreviation, MK. And because Jacob Zuma is known to pander to a bit of narrow Zulu interests, some strategists in the media houses, in fact, journalists who are actually called out by the national journalism organization called South African National Editors Forum, actually called them out. But basically what they did was to run stories in some, kind of what used to be called penny press or yellow press for that matter, but on digital formats, suggesting that former President Trump was supporting Jacob Zuma and MK. And this became quite a talking point because quite a number of, digital media platforms ran with the story and attempts at repeating it and railing against it or correcting this misinformation was like, bolting the stable after the horse has already left. And I think we've seen many other examples, including in the recent times, we've seen in a country such as Zambia, misinformation around the president there indicating that it was very unwell and might not even survive. In fact, just the other day, I was on a TV show and, it's actually an Islamic TV show as a guest. And one of the, anchors there was posing the question that we hear President Biden is very unwell. He might actually not be alive. I think this is when he went down with COVID-19. And this is just to mention a number of examples. But now the challenging aspect there has been that in view of this, some authoritarian governments on the continent have taken advantage of misinformation and disinformation, whether it's high level or low caliber or just fun, to actually negatively impact freedom of expression. I think one can mention the case of former Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari and his decision to ban Twitter in Nigeria in 2022, which lasted a couple of months. As we speak right now, on the basis of just that, a number of laws have come up in places like Uganda, where the president there, Yoweri Museveni, in fact, has banned the use of Facebook. This ultimately is just a tip of the iceberg as to how journalists more broadly, even those that operate via digital social media platforms, are actually hampered from doing their work by this pretext of managing misinformation and disinformation, to institute laws that are anti-access to information, freedom of expression, and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
I
would ask one
Can I give you the power of, we talk about the power of social media? I was in Ghana for the year of return. And the question that Bob, I know we laugh about it, but the question that Bob asked, understand the job that white media has done on Black people in America when it comes to Africa has been devastating. The number of people who were shocked with the post I was making of upscale neighborhoods in Ghana, the things that I was posting, they literally had no idea. So do understand, when you are traveling to the motherland, when you're traveling to other places, when you're traveling to St. Croix, when you're traveling to Jamaica, understand the lack of knowledge in this country, but especially among African Americans, is huge. And so if you're able to share that information, people were like, wow, I had no clue. Or they were literally saying, man, I thought there wasn't electricity. I thought it wasn't this. So the power of social media, you can use it to actually correct so many lies that people have and misconceptions. And so never underestimate how even one post could change somebody's perception and reality.
I'm going to ask our panelists, because we have about 10 minutes left, if the panelists could keep their answers brief so all questions could be answered.
Hello, my name is Ron. I'm a PA right now with Abby Phillips Show. And my question is for Travis. You talked about how like with audience and everything, how when you're appealing to the newer audience. My question is, do you notice that the older audience fall off when you try that?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe a little bit, but a lot of the older audience is not on social media.
Okay.
So, you know, we realize that they're going to our site, they're going to WashingtonPost.com, and that's what they're doing on a daily basis. Some of them obviously are on social, but you know, even if they did fall off, like that wouldn't change our mindset or our programming because, you know, we have a mission. We are, you know, obviously, you know, the Washington Post, and, you know, if people don't like what we post, that's okay. We have 6.8 million other followers on Instagram. Like, and so, you know, we obviously like, you know, take into consideration what people want to see and try to keep them informed on a daily basis. But, you know, if people fall off, like that's on them. Like we're going to do what we do.
Okay.
And I think that if you're a journalism organization or if you're a creator or a journalist, like you should, you know, approach social media and with a goal of, I'm going to do what I do and it'll find the right audience. Like if I know what I need to be doing in that space, you know, some people might not like that. Some people might unsubscribe or unfollow or whatever, but like you'll find other people who will subscribe who are looking for that content.
Okay, because a follow-up to that, because y'all talked a lot about focusing on your core. So what if you want to like change that core because of like, okay, it's a new generation. We want to be able to reach more people, but through doing that, you lose out on the older people.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and say this here, and I'm not being disrespectful. That's how CNN screwed up. See, on the Chris Lick, CNN screwed up by abandoning his core audience. That's why it's suffering right now. You don't abandon your core audience.
Right.
You build on top of your core. Your core audience is essentially a foundation of a house. If you have a bad foundation, your house is screwed up. So you have to recognize with your numbers, okay, and studying the demographics. If I look, I look at my YouTube audience. 65 plus, 37%, 55 to 64, 29%, 45 to 54, 18%, 35 to 44, 9.7, and then it goes down. It actually mirrors voting trends as well. If I try to shift from my core, audience gone, money gone. So you have to look at your core audience and then augment your content. And so if this is your core, you sort of you're adding to it. What you don't do is run from your core because you could completely wipe out your audience, and that's devastating.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like we're gonna do the news, right?
Yeah.
Like we're gonna have, like if you go to any of our social media pages or our platforms, you're gonna get the news. But it's like, what are we adding on top of that? So we launched a wellness section a couple years ago, and we realized people on social media don't really like hard news all the time, right? And so they want some of that softer content. They want to know how they can, you know, do their skincare routine or what they should add to their skincare routine. And so we've added some of that content in on top of our core. And so that's extended our reach in that way.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Morning, everyone. Cesar Rodriguez, Media Relations for BP, born and raised in Chicago. Welcome to my city. Just wanted to touch base. You touched on this a few minutes ago about journalism schools. I graduated in 2005. So essentially what I learned is obsolete. But what is your take? Where do journalism schools go now? Do they adapt or do they become obsolete in the way they're teaching and what they're teaching?
If they continue to do what they're now, they'll be obsolete.
For sure.
What I've actually recommended to folks, and the people get mad at me, I've recommended them not major in journalism, minor in journalism, major in another particular expertise, so you have a different understanding of knowledge, whether it's economics, whether it's politics, whether it's sociology, depending upon what you're actually trying to pursue. The skill set is absolutely different. The who, what, where, when, how, and why doesn't change. But you have to have a different type of knowledge approach to bring to the table. I've always been locked and loaded on politics. So when I came in, first two jobs, literally the first interview, they said, "Hey, how do you feel about the cops beat?" I said, "I don't." I let them know right now. If you're considering hiring me for this, I ain't coming. And I had another newspaper, the Houston Chronicle, and again, that's my hometown paper. I was out of college 7 months. And they said, hey, we're thinking about putting you on a police beat for 2 years. I said, I can go back to Austin. I'm not doing that. Because I understood what, in terms of what my focus was. 6 months later, Star Telegram Club hits me to cover City Hall. So I understood that. But it's in the second point for journalism schools, they have got to bring real expertise into the schools. Because the problem is the students, and I am the one hiring recent college graduates, and most of them are grossly, I'm trying to be nice, but they are grossly undertrained. I mean, it's not even funny. And so I keep telling these J schools, if you're not bringing professionals into your journalism programs, teaching them what's actually happening, that sheet of paper is utterly worthless if you do not have these skill set.
For sure. Couple things to add there. Any Mizzou grads in here? Anybody from Missouri? Nobody? U of I. I spoke at Mizzou a couple months ago, and I gotta say that I am so impressed with their students and their journalism program. Obviously, they're top notch, but they have a sect of their journalism school that is focused. It's a audience major, and it's one of the first in the country to do something like this. But I told them, I was like, y'all are prepping these students. If they want to go into audience or journalism, they're great. They're gonna be great. But also, audience translates everywhere. It translates to business. If you want to be a lawyer, if you want to do, if you want to launch, you want to be an entrepreneur, like you obviously are going to care about your audience. So understanding your audience, it's so translatable. And so I think journalism schools really have to continue to adapt and think about how they can push forward when it comes to things like that. How, the traditional journalism school curriculum is just not gonna fly in the future. But I will say that, I think that, if you are trained as a journalist, like that is also applicable in other places. But another thing I'll say real quick is to Roland's point about not bringing experts into these journalism schools. No shade to Georgetown, but Georgetown, for example, asked me to adjunct. And then I was like, okay, cool, like I'll adjunct. And they were like, oh, actually, you don't have a master's. And I'm like,
Shade.
I was like, oh, interesting. But like, I've been in the field for 10 years and they were like, oh, okay, yeah, it's not going to work out. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right, that's fine.
That's dumb as hell.
But that's the type of thing where it's like, why do you need that qualification to teach these students who want to go into the field and do exactly what I'm doing, right? And so
You should tell them, let's do a journalism versus. You should have said, put the master's person over there. I'm gonna be over here and I'm about to light that ass up.
Right.
You should have a journalism versus.
Good morning. I'm Will Brown. I operate a soccer website that's geared toward Floridians through text and photos. Earlier it was mentioned about, how there are tools, how to study analytics, but algorithms have been mentioned multiple times. What are tools and ways that you would suggest that the people in this room can become more up to date on algorithmic trends?
The beauty of YouTube, they share all of that. Most people YouTube every day posts what are the top stories that are driving YouTube. Most folks don't even check it. They also are not studying what works. And so when you hit a certain number of subscribers at a certain level on YouTube, they sort of assign you your own person. And so one of the things on YouTube, and this is something that people don't even think about, the thumbnail is hugely important on YouTube. If you just put up a bland thumbnail, ain't nobody recommend your video. The caption in the thumbnail is important.
Right.
The caption on the actual post is important. Those three things right there will determine in many ways whether your video gets shared or not. And so that's just one of those things that has nothing to do with the content. So one thing that I tell everybody, study other people. look at their pages, look at how they do it, look at length of videos, look at posts. If you're in an area, because remember what he said, look, they're looking at the New York Times doing. They're looking at these other different people. Study what other people are doing to understand how is this person, I'm go ahead and say this. This is when I knew Carlos Watson and Ozzie was a fraud. And I said this publicly, so I don't care. That's why he just got convicted. I was watching their YouTube videos and I hit my digital guy, said, Keenan, can you explain to me what the hell are they doing where they're getting 1 million, 1.5 million views and they got 30 comments? It is impossible to do 1.5 million views and only have 25, 30 comments.
Right.
I knew they were cheating. I got videos that only did 100,000 views that had 1,200 comments. So that was the first tell for me. They were doing fraudulent, and then of course found out they were scraping. Okay, they're doing videos. So you have to actually look at other people and study what they are doing, and then you begin to understand how they're able to drive their traffic, because they are listen, it's a battle. Every day we're sitting there going, because YouTube was all of a sudden we were doing something, and they started recommending the recommended videos were like 6 months old. We're like, what the hell's going on? And so my team, a couple people are constantly looking every day how that thing is changing, and then we make alterations based upon how their algorithm changes to make sure that our revenue doesn't go from 100,000 to 60 the next month.
So it's 10:30, but the staff here is allowing us to stay a few minutes longer so everyone can get their questions answered. Again, I ask our panelists to keep your answers brief so everyone can get their question answered.
Good morning. My name is Randy Richardson. I'm a print reporter at today.com, the website of the Today Show. My question is for Travis. I've been doing on my own social media some video versions of my articles as proof of concept to my managers that, hey, I can do this on our platforms too. And their response has been, we have our broadcast talent. So what do you consider when you may want a story made into a video and deciding whether to use the print reporter or like an anchor or correspondent who, may or may not have the same information?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like the information is the most important thing, right? Like we have reporters who will report an article, but we don't always have to use them as the person who's on camera. If someone can articulate what the reporting says and really formulate what that information is in a video form, I think that's really all that matters. But when we're selecting, whether to, translate an article to a video or not, I think the most important thing is like, what is it bringing the audience? Does the audience get something more out of this as a video? Or should it just be an article or a text-based post on social media? And so that's what we really try to weigh as we're trying to see if we want to extend something to a video. Like, is there a visual element to the story? Is there something the audience needs to see, or does it make sense for them to hear from a reporter or someone on camera to articulate what the story is or what point they're trying to get across? And that's really what we weigh when we're thinking about whether to make the transition.
Do you have a contract?
No, I'm at will.
Okay, so I want whatever your agreement is, I want you to study your agreement. And if you're not prohibited, you can be doing that on your own. Now, understand?
For sure.
And by doing it on your own, you may very well end up putting your own following. So their whole deal is, yeah, well, we don't want you voicing, or that's fine. But if there are no prohibitions of you acting on your own, do that. And you may end up building such a following where you can say, today, holler at y'all later, I'm going to do this here.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Deja Garner. I am a student multimedia journalist at North Carolina A&T Rising Junior. Thank you guys for talking, but I did have a couple of questions. So as you guys know, the Gen Z generation they're filled with many influencers and they're not credible. So I am studying journalism, and so I am trying to get connected with social media and all the social platforms, but I want to make sure that I am not falling in the trends of what's going on. So my question is to both of you guys, how do you still gain respect as a student journalist while still connecting with my generation?
First of all, I'll say, you're not a student journalist, you're a journalist. And when I speak to students across the country, I tell them, I'm like, y'all are doing journalism, you're a journalist. And I think if you come straight up with that and say, and announce yourself as a journalist on social media, tell people who you are and your authentic self, like that carries so much weight. Like, I don't care, if you work for the New York Times or you're a reporter for the Stanford student newspaper. If you're like, I'm a student journalist on the ground doing this, like that's all I need to know. And that carries weight.
You ever heard of Schoolhouse Rock?
Yes.
You and others should be doing Schoolhouse Rock 2.0. If I'm you, I would literally say, all right, I'm gonna post a video. I'm gonna go around campus and I'm gonna say, name me the 3 branches of the federal government. Then I'm gonna go, North Carolina. I'm gonna go around and I'm gonna ask 10 students, name me the governor of North Carolina. I'm going to try to figure out a way to communicate to that audience based on what they don't know and what they should know. And so now all of a sudden, you can do it in a fun way, it can be an interesting way, but at the end of the day, you are educating. The thing that my Angela told me this a month before she died, we were talking, and she said, I mentioned well, my brother and my sister are teachers. I said, I'm the only one who's not. She says, no, you are a teacher. She says, I watch you, you teach. And that stuck with me because that then so many people afterwards. So we have to understand, people are watching us. We are actually teaching. And so we are filling a role that classrooms are not. So if you take that approach and you make it interesting and you make it fun, you then can create that same effect of teaching your generation the things that they should know about politics, about news or whatever, but you're doing it just in a different way. And so that to me is another way where you stay connected with generation, but you're also trying to get them to broaden their knowledge.
And the other thing I'll say is everyone's an expert at something, right? You said North Carolina A&T. So I don't know really much about North Carolina A&T at all. It's Fayetteville, is that where it is?
No,
Or-
it's in Greensboro.
Right, exactly. So, right.
It's the largest EECU in the country.
I should know that. I'm a professional journalist, right? But like, you are an expert on Greensboro, on North Carolina A&T. So like, you bring that perspective and that authenticity and that knowledge of the city, of the school to whatever platform that you're on. And so if you say that and announce that early in whatever social media post you're posting, like, that's all you need to know. I'm gonna watch whatever you're posting. I'm gonna consume that content.
And I wonder how many of your students still know that they split your campus into 2 congressional districts because they did not want all of those students in one district. That's another video that you could be saying, where you could say, where do you live on campus? Do you realize you're in that district and not this one? Again, that's just a different way of using your platform to teach.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Republicans did that in North Carolina.
Hi, thank you guys for the panel. My name is Atia Atkins and I am a Black-owned newspaper publisher and owner. Newspaper is called Village News, VILLIJ News.
That's amazing.
And it's in South Florida in Pompano Beach, hyper local, focusing on, only community issues. So many times I've wanted to quit because it's very hard, but the community has embraced us. They tell us they need us, they want us. And just from your experience, Ron, how can you scale to better serve your community?
Okay, no, you're not done yet.
Okay.
When you say scale, what do you mean?
Scale to get more employees, get more revenue, so I can continue to serve the community.
Okay, first of all, what assessment have you done of your community? So of your audience, what's the size, what's your potential size in your community?
So currently it's a printed newspaper, so the audience,
No, not the printed people. What's the number of available African Americans in your city?
our population in Pompano Beach is about 80,000.
Got it?
I focus only on the African American community.
Right.
I don't have the population numbers, but it's District 4 and District 5. So those
Okay, so
districts
stop right there.
I focus
So
on.
you do not know what the Black population is,
I do not have the exact numbers.
which means that you have not done the proper research of your own audience. So
Okay,
you can't scale if you don't know who you're scaling to.
okay,
So the first thing you need to go back to is pull your demographic data of what is the population data of African Americans in your city, not district, in the city.
okay,
The second thing is, what are the age population of those individuals in your particular city? Thirdly, what are the critical community organizations that also service that particular audience?
okay.
So if Pompano Beach is 80,000, and if you pull up and let's say it's 30% African American, now you're only dealing with 24,000 people.
Mhm.
So now I want to look at what are the age demographics of that? So the possibility is I may only be serving anywhere from 8 to 10,000 people.
Mhm.
Now I then have to understand that that's who I'm serving. And so what my goal is to make sure I have my revenues in line with my expenses, that I'm not trying to shoot over my skis and where I'm spending more money than I should be doing.
Right.
Thirdly, what is the potential revenue base of your audience? What is the advertising base? And then are those folks subscribing? Now you said you're a print publication.
Yes.
Which meaning you already are appealing to a very small people because most don't do that. So if you don't have a digital product, you're likely leaving out more than 80-90% of your audience.
We do have a digital product, but it's better received in print version. People in this demographic
What does
want the
better
print.
receive mean? Money?
See, that's the problem. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the problem.
That's
Yeah,
my point.
yeah. The comments, but the money, yes, you're right. That's the problem.
So that's not better received.
Right.
So somebody gets a small percentage is reading it. So you need to be doing better market research of your audience to understand how to serve them and how to monetize that.
And what are their habits?
Yeah.
How are they?
Where do they go?
Where do they go? Do they have Androids or iPhones? Like you should do some like surveys and research, like Roland said, to know who your audience is, how to interact with your content. Maybe, obviously you said that a lot of them are reading print. Maybe they would like to be, reading on online more, but
Right.
you don't know that. So
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Market research is crucial. And that data is free for the census. It's all free.
right,
Good morning, panelists. How are you?
doing well.
My name is Amory White, and I'm a full-time student pursuing my education abroad in Athens, Greece. I am an aspiring
You know there. Where you from?
Augusta, Georgia.
Damn, you want to get out, huh?
You know it. Right, nothing there for me. I'm an aspiring international correspondence journalist, and I'm in the midst of building my social media presence. And I was wondering if, like, my target audience is like people in the South who are very stagnated and have a one-track mindset, who are victims of the propaganda that America has, shown them of overseas and third world countries and other stuff like that. And I want to know what type of content I should like push out. Like, I'm in the midst of reactivating my school's radio club. I want to make TikToks and stuff like that. I just want to know like what specific content I should push out.
You want?
Bob, did you hear that question?
Yes,
Bob?
I did. Yes, I did, and I can respond quite, a bit in the following ways. I think from an international, journalism perspective, if you're going to focus on Africa, there are a couple of things you could do. One is you could start by looking at U.S. policy towards Africa. The latest such policy was released by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in 2022. And because that then indicates the areas of confluence between the US and African nations. I think one, for example, you can pick out the issue, for example, the US promotion of human rights and democracy on the continent. I think the question of racial relations in the US are of critical importance to Africans and even African Americans as well, you know, the diaspora who are returning to the continent. And I think we saw a spike in stories around that over the murder of George Floyd. But you know, the affinities between African Americans and Africans is such a big draw for audiences, you know, people born on the continent who feel like we are distant cousins, as it were. And so that would be interesting content. I think Roland did mention looking at the demographies of African immigrants to the continent. It's to the, you know, this is to the US. This is said to be the fastest growing segment of the African American population in the US. And if you went to international organizations such as International Organization for Migration, they actually do have data indicating the exact numbers or approximate numbers of, for instance, Senegalese in New York, you know, Nigerians, as was mentioned, Texas, Ethiopians in DC and LA, Somalis in Minnesota, and so forth. So that will also be greatly interesting. And I think if you are looking for an international career on the continent, there are just so very many opportunities, but you will need strategy. There are certain countries that are very difficult to operate from. If you're going to go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, as a war correspondent, then you'll do well. But if you're going to do lifestyle stories or look at economic issues, the major hubs on the continent will remain Johannesburg, Nairobi, Accra to some extent, Lagos, and so forth. I think another major international journalism domain is a geopolitical play. Every time you mention China in Africa, it is of great interest to Americans. And every time you mention the US, the Chinese and the Russians sit up. So if your area is international relations, foreign policy, and diplomacy, those will be some of the ideas. But I think I want to wish you very well in this. There's a huge gap in that area. In fact, let me just finish by saying, Roland did mention that the Americans are woefully ignorant about Africa. And to some extent, the same is with Africans, actually. Beyond, musical and cultural productions from Hollywood, we all listen, we all, people of my age know Michael Jackson songs offhand. But once you go to where is Nebraska in the US, where's Omaha? People will be like, oh, where's Niagara, for example, even just basic geographical factors. What's the history of enslavement and so forth? I think we are not taught this in schools, and therefore these are not kinds of pieces of information we know offhand. So I think those kinds of informational literacy, of African Americans and Africans will be of great interest, I believe. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Mr. Bob.
All right, guys, good morning. I'm a morning angler at a small market station in Georgia as well. Any advice on when you're trying to create content, whether for mainstream media or on your personal social media, when you deal with a news director who doesn't have a taste or preference for the stories that you're trying to cover because you want to do things outside of traditional shootings and things like that?
I'm gonna go back to, what's your contract?
Well, my news director's trying to block me from getting another job, but
No,
I
no,
just.
no, that's not what I asked. What you have to do is, one of the mistakes of a lot of folks, they have agent, you have an agent?
I don't, I'm trying to find one.
Okay. That's the only reason I said. So a lot of people don't actually study their contracts.
Okay.
So you need to study your contract to see what it is that you can and cannot do.
Mhm.
What, if it says what you can't do,
Right.
then your deal is anything outside of that I can do. It's like the United States Constitution. If it ain't mentioned, it's a state's right.
Okay.
So you have to do that. So you do not want to put your job in jeopardy.
Right.
So study your contract to understand, do they control your name, likeness, image?
Right.
Study your contract to see what social media prohibitions they have in the contract.
Okay.
I keep recommending to any journalist, do not let the station do your social media.
Mhm.
Do not make your social media using the station's handle.
Okay.
You tell them, nope, I already have social media. I can post on that because that's real estate.
Right.
They can keep that real estate if you leave.
Right.
Please
Don't put your call letters in your.
Hell no. CNN tried that. I
Yeah.
told them, hell no, it's rolling this Martin. I don't need y'all help.
Gotcha.
Which was the smartest damn decision because I never allowed them to touch my stuff.
Gotcha.
But I need you to first study your contract.
I have it in my book.
So the key is
Okay.
then that will determine the stuff that you can do.
Mhm.
Now, if they specify what you can't do, we talk about soft news, whatever,
Right.
then you can say, well, I can do this, this, this. Okay, but that's the key. Study that first, let that then dictate how you proceed.
Okay, thank you so much.
Anyone else? All right.
I drove TV One crazy when I read my contract.
Okay. You have one more? Was there somebody else? Is there one more?
They tried.
Is there one?
Is there one more?
Will you come?
The Lord says there's one more.
Hi, my name's Sydney Culpepper, and I'm a rising junior at Tennessee State University. I just like your best advice on what area of journalism I should focus on right now, mass communications and journalism concentration within my school. So I'm just kind of just trying to find my niche thing. Maybe on campus, me and my friends that take a class together, we wanted to do kind of like TikTok and Instagram videos about like updates on campus. So I just wanted to know what you guys think would be best for me.
You mean the beat? What beat you should cover? What platform?
Like, well, my original goal was to become a reporter and a news anchor, but I want to see if I'm interested in like other areas of journalism as a whole.
Okay, what's your expertise? Right now, what do you do well right now?
Writing.
You do writing.
Yes.
That's producing.
Yes.
Okay, so do you edit?
I do edit.
Do you shoot?
I have somebody else shoot for
Right.
me and
You
I
should
edit
start
with
shooting.
them. Okay.
You have to develop multiple skill sets.
Right.
Because you may be in a position that when you graduate, you're going into a situation where you're a one-man band.
Mm.
So you need to have all of those skill sets because you don't want to be in a situation to where you may not be able to get a reporter writing job, but there's a producing job available. But if you know how to produce, you can apply for that particular job. There are many people who are transitioning from producing into on air. And then there are people who transition from on air to producing. And so where you are now, develop your skill set. You should be shooting all the time. You should be then editing. You should be doing audio. You should be doing all of those different things. I get TikTok and Instagram, but I said it earlier, create the YouTube channel because you should be monetizing. I don't give a damn about likes and clicks. I care about money. Money pays for you to do the content. And so create that where you can also begin to drive folks there as well. A lot of people who they love stories. I hate stories. Why? Content disappears. I believe in posting. So the key is before you can even figure out what the area, develop your skill set and then you say, what is it I really, really like? You may discover your skill set really is producing. And guess what? That's actually where the power is. The producers really tell the folks on air what to do. And so that's what you should be doing, building your skill set.
For sure. I mean, the number one thing I tell students is to be as well-rounded when you graduate as you can, be able to do everything. And that's when it comes to creating content, but also the other flip side of it, know how to understand analytics, know how to look at data and analyze it and say, okay, we should do more of this and less of that. Because that is really how you get better, right? Like you do less of the stuff that sucks and more of the stuff that does well. And that's really that's really all social media is. You see 10 posts that get 1 million views and you're like, okay, we should do more of that. You have 10 posts that get less than 1,000 views, you do less of those. And that's really how you get better and how you move forward. So being able to analyze that and really put it into a report form is such a valuable skill. And so really as you're an undergrad, invest time in that side of the coin as well.
This is, every person here has this in their hand. I want you to go to Netflix, and everybody in this room, I want you to go look at a movie called High Flying Bird. Write this down or type it in. High Flying Bird. Oscar winner Steven Soderbergh shot that movie with 2 iPhone 7s. The entire film. The reason I want you to look at it, because I want you to understand, most of the features in the new iPhone, that was from an email he sent to Apple saying how to improve the phone. This is a dangerous tool if you know what the hell to do with it. This is not a phone. You can shoot, you can edit, you can do audio, you can do everything on it. If he shot an entire feature-length film, Matthew Cherry, just type it in YouTube, Matthew Cherry, an iPhone movie. He shot a whole movie with an iPhone 5 or 6, I believe. So we are walking around with instruments and we're not playing them. So you should be maximizing this. You don't have to sit here, oh my goodness, I need a C300, I need this, I need that, I need this. No, you should be totally thinking just totally different. Make sure you have good audio, which means get the DJI wireless microphone, which plugs right in. You have basic small key lights that go on top. Small Rig has a rig, actually I have in my room, where you can hold your iPhone for stability. Maximize your skill set with the tools. And then when you do that, it's wide open.
Okay, we have one more
Thank you.
question and we really have to go, sir.
Thank you. My name is Jibril Diallo. I represent the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, whose main job is to strengthen the ties between Africa and the diaspora. A question to Bob Wekesa and Roland Martin. This is really unusual, it's transcontinental, but there's a whole audience which is out there. English speaking, French speaking, Portuguese speaking. In these days, when you don't need interpretation booths out there, how do you open up Roland Martin and Bob Wekesa to these constituencies so that they can follow what's going on here? Thank you.
Bob, did you hear that one?
I did. It was a bit scratchy, but glad to hear Jibril Diallo's voice, because I know him for a couple of years now. In fact, I should mention that Jibril did introduce me to former president of NABJ called Yearwood way back in 2019. I think clearly we need almost a Marshall Plan on covering the African diaspora. And I think, as was pointed out earlier by one of my fellow panelists, we are actually just scratching the surface, because diaspora does not mean the US only. In fact, here on the continent, we hear quite a bit of, and elsewhere in the world, we hear contestation about America not just being the US. We have Mexicans, Brazilians, the Caribbeans, and so forth. I think my colleagues who are on the panel have been very eloquent on how to use social media platforms, particularly YouTube. If we just want publicity, going with TikTok, Instagram, for instance, as avenues through which we can implement some of the policies that have been put forth, for example, by the African Union, which considers diaspora the fifth, the sixth, region of Africa. But I think the big deal is converting those high-flying policies into newspaper articles, social media posts, video productions, and items like those. I suppose one of the approaches, which is a challenge to the NABJ, is essentially to work with the African Renaissance and Diaspora Network, which of course already works with the NABJ, but also J schools on the continent, journalism organizations, and there are quite a few. For example, we have Federation of African Journalists. We have the Continental Body of Editors. I think it's called African Editors Forum, to kind of start an initiative where there are journalistic exchanges, opportunities for journalists from the US to come over for extended periods of time on enterprise reporting, and similar exchanges towards the US. connections between journalism students in universities, including mine, Wits University, but also, student journalism from Francophone countries, Anglophone countries, Lusophone countries, and so forth. And I think if it's done holistically with understanding that Africa, in fact, has over 2,000 languages, that will start, bridging the gap that we have currently of the continent not speaking with itself, but also not being able to connect with the United States. I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. All right, the time is now 11 o'clock on the dot. I thank our panelists, Bob Wokesa, Travis Lyles, Roland Martin, our organizer, Joe Davidson, and the staff for letting us stay well past our time. Thank you all for coming and enjoy the rest of the convention.
Appreciate y'all.